My family cut me off because my happy relationship made my sister feel bad. They banned me from family events and skipped my wedding when I refused to apologize for being happy. I never really imagined that my happiness could be an issue for someone else, but turns out, I totally misjudged that. It all kicked off last spring when I brought Dayla over to celebrate my dad's birthday. I should have noticed the red flags back then, but I was just too wrapped up in my own joy to see the storm brewing in the background. Dayla and I had been together for about 8 months by then, and it was amazing. It just felt right, you know? Like everything was so effortless. He made me laugh every day and genuinely listened when I talked about work, my hobbies, or even random stuff I was thinking about. He never made me feel like I was too much or too little, just perfectly me. Our conversations could go on for hours, even when we weren't talking about anything special. Even the quiet moments between us felt comfortable, not awkward. So, when my dad's 55th birthday came around, I was really looking forward to introducing Dayla to more of my family. He'd already met my mom and stepdad a few weeks back, and they were all over him. My mom wouldn't stop texting me about how polite and funny he was, and my stepdad even asked if Dayla wanted to go fishing the next weekend, which was a big deal since he usually took a while to warm up to new people. But meeting my dad's side of the family was different. There's always some kind of drama, usually involving my half-sister Rebecca, who's 28 but often acts like she's stuck in her teenage years. Rebecca has this thing where she falls hard for guys who are clearly wrong for her. Like, she once dated a married coworker who just vanished after 6 months, or a guy who lived with his ex but swore they were just roommates. And let's not forget the one who borrowed $3,000 and ghosted her. She'd call my dad and stepmom in tears, unable to figure out why it kept happening, and they'd rush over with ice cream and tissues, telling her it wasn't her fault. Instead of learning from these experiences, she relied on my dad and stepmom to fix things every time. They'd pay her rent when she blew money on gifts for these guys, co-sign loans after her credit went south, and even let her move back in when things got really bad. So, I walked into my dad's birthday dinner hand in hand with Dayla, thinking everyone would be happy to see that I was doing well. I'd had my share of romantic misadventures in my early 20s too, so I figured my family would be thrilled to see me with someone who really treated me right. But as soon as we sat down, I could tell something was off. Everyone was polite, asking Dayla the usual questions about his job and how we met. He was his usual charming self, but I noticed my dad seemed to like him, even if he was trying to hide it. Rebecca was there too, looking miserable. She'd just been dumped by some guy she met online who had lied about basically everything, and she'd been texting me all week about how she was starting to believe good guys didn't exist and maybe she should just get a bunch of cats. I'd tried to be supportive, but it was exhausting hearing the same story over and over about how she was always surprised when things didn't work out with guys who were obviously wrong for her. So, there we were at dinner, and Dayla was sharing this sweet story about a patient of his, an elderly man learning to walk again, and it was just so nice listening to him. But then my stepmom Karen made this comment about how it must be nice to be so carefree and happy all the time. Her tone was off, and I suddenly noticed Rebecca looking like she was about to cry. I felt awful, realizing my happiness might be hard for her to deal with right then. I tried to steer the convo to her new job, but she just gave a shrug and said it was fine. The rest of the night was awkward. On the way home, Dayla said he noticed the vibe was weird and I explained about Rebecca's breakup. He said he got it, but I shouldn't have to hide how happy I am just to make others feel better. Then, the next morning, Karen texted me saying we needed to talk. When I called her, she went off about how my behavior was insensitive to Rebecca, like I was flaunting my relationship when she was having a hard time. I was baffled. I was just being me, sharing my life with my family. Karen suggested I tone it down around Rebecca and be more supportive. I reminded her how I've always been there for Rebecca through her dramas, but Karen said it wasn't the same and that right now, Rebecca needed more from me. I agreed to be more aware, but inside, it didn't feel right to hide my happiness or pretend things weren't going great with Dayla. I talked it over with Dayla, and even he thought it sounded like they were asking way too much. So, I was in a bit of a bind trying to keep things chill around my family, mainly because of Rebecca's issues, which we all know aren't the healthiest for anyone. I didn't want to stir the pot with my family, so I decided to downplay my relationship a bit when I was with them, though it felt kind of strange and like I was faking it. Fast forward a few weeks, and I went to my cousin's graduation party alone since Dayla, my partner, had work commitments that weekend. Still, even without Dayla, Karen and my dad gave me weird looks anytime I smiled or laughed at a joke. Rebecca showed up with this new guy she'd been dating. He seemed nice at first, but as the day went on, he revealed himself to be one of those people who constantly corrects or contradicts everyone, thinking he's smarter than the rest of us. Rebecca was totally into this guy, hanging on his every word, even when he was being a jerk. I noticed Karen and my dad exchanging worried glances, but they didn't talk to Rebecca about it. Later on, after the party, Karen cornered me. She mentioned how I seemed more pleasant when Dela wasn't there and suggested I start attending family gatherings solo until Rebecca got more comfortable in her new relationship. I was blindsided because this wasn't what I thought we'd agreed on. I told Karen the first was just trying to be more sensitive, not exclude Dela from family events. But Karen insisted that his presence seemed to bother Rebecca and that leaving him out would only be temporary and help with family harmony. I flat out refused because Dela is my partner, and I wasn't about to treat him like something to be hidden just because Rebecca couldn't handle seeing other people happy. Karen got defensive, accusing me of being selfish for not considering Rebecca's feelings, and said if I cared about her, I'd make this small sacrifice. But honestly, it didn't feel small to me at all. I pointed out that Rebecca is 28 and needs to start dealing with her own issues instead of us all bending over backward to accommodate her. Karen said I was being harsh and unsympathetic, that Rebecca needed family support, not criticism. I argued back that constantly rescuing Rebecca was preventing her from learning from her mistakes. Karen called me terrible things for saying that about my sister, claiming I was cold and selfish during her time of need. The conversation got heated. Karen accused me of being jealous of how my dad doted on Rebecca, and I retorted that I was more about living independently rather than stirring up drama that required family intervention constantly. By the end of it, we were both heated. Karen suggested I take time to consider the kind of sister and daughter I wanted to be. Until then, I wasn't welcome to family activities because I was being unsupportive. I left feeling confused because I didn't understand how wanting to bring my boyfriend around made me selfish. I'd been patient with Rebecca's constant relationship disasters for ages and never made her feel bad about her decisions, even when they were clearly poor. When I told Dela about this, he was outraged, thinking my family was being unreasonable and manipulative. He said it seemed like Rebecca always got the spotlight during her issues, and anyone not playing into that drama was labeled mean. It just wasn't fair to me. I didn't hear from my dad or Karen for nearly 2 weeks, which was odd since we usually talked or texted often. I waited for them to reach out and maybe apologize or work out a compromise, but nothing. Instead, I'd just get random texts from Rebecca, whining about her boyfriend showing his true colors. One evening, my dad finally called, saying he'd thought about everything and agreed with Karen that I was insensitive to Rebecca's situation. He suggested a break to cool down and asked me not to attend family gatherings for now as my attitude was causing tension. I was dumbfounded because he seemed to imply my happiness was a problem. I told him it seemed he was prioritizing Rebecca's inability to handle her problems over his relationship with me. He said if I was stubborn, maybe distance would give me perspective. I said maybe he was right because I was tired of being guilted for having a stable relationship while everyone enabled Rebecca's chaos. After hanging up, I sat in my car outside work and cried, feeling like my dad had essentially banished me because I wouldn't pretend to be miserable to make Rebecca feel better about her choices. It felt like a twisted world where happiness was a flaw and drama was rewarded. Dela found me at home and immediately pulled me into a hug, letting me vent and cry it out. He told me my family was toxic and that maybe this break was good, giving me space to recognize the messed up dynamic. Reflecting on it with him, I realized my dad and Karen always coddled Rebecca while expecting me to be self-sufficient. When I had relationship troubles, they'd give me a few minutes of generic advice and move on. But with Rebecca, they'd analyze every detail, making elaborate plans to help her. In the following weeks, I found myself enjoying the drama-free life. I didn't have to worry about tiptoeing around Rebecca or censoring my happiness. Dela and I went to concerts, tried new places to eat, and took trips without considering how it might affect Rebecca. It was refreshing to just enjoy life. During lunch with my mom one Saturday, she noticed how relaxed I was. I explained what happened with my dad's side, and she was appalled. She said hiding my happiness to protect someone was manipulative and that healthy families celebrate each other's joys. She also noted Rebecca was almost 30 and should take responsibility for her life choices instead of having others manage her emotions. She felt my dad and Karen's enabling was more harmful than helpful. Meanwhile, Rebecca kept texting her woes, revealing her new boyfriend was just another bad choice. He was financially irresponsible, had a temper, and made her uncomfortable with his comments. I was frustrated, as it was so clear he was another disaster waiting to happen. But knowing Rebecca, if I pointed this out, she'd likely accuse me of being unsupportive again. So, I just sent vague support messages like, "That sounds tough, you deserve better," which felt superficial. So, it all seemed to be right up her alley. After about 6 weeks of enduring this forced arrangement for my dad's side of the family, Delpha and I were having a chill dinner at our favorite spot. Out of nowhere, Delpha gets all serious and says he's got something important to ask me. My heart was pounding because I thought, oh no, he's gonna break up with me. But nope, he pulls out a little ring box and asks if I want to spend our lives making each other happy. I blurted out yes before he even finished because being with Delpha showed me what it truly means to be valued and loved. I couldn't picture my life with anyone else. The ring was perfect, just my style, simple and classy, nothing too flashy. It felt like it had always belonged on my finger. We spent the rest of dinner dreaming about our future, buying a house, taking trips, building a life together. Everything just felt possible and incredibly exciting, unlike anything I'd felt before. We didn't want to drag out the engagement because we were both so ready to dive into married life. We opted for a small, intimate ceremony with the people who truly mattered, rather than a big, stressful production. When we got home, I started thinking about who to call to share the news. My dad and Karen didn't even make the list. Just the thought of telling them about the engagement filled me with dread. They'd likely twist it to be about Rebecca's issues or lecture me on fixing my relationship with her before moving forward with my life. I called my mom first, and she screamed in joy, crying happy tears over video chat as she admired the ring. She said she'd known Delpha was the one from the start and couldn't wait to officially welcome him into the family. Next, I called my best friend, who had introduced me to Delpha. She said she'd been waiting for this call for months because we were so obviously perfect for each other. We spent an hour chatting about wedding plans, venues, dresses, and she immediately offered to be my maid of honor. I was touched and grateful to have people genuinely excited for my happiness. But calling my dad? That was a different story. I kept avoiding it, not wanting to deal with his likely complicated reaction. Delpha noticed my stress and asked why I was so on edge about it. I explained my worries about how Dad and Karen might react, especially with all the drama in the recent months. Delpha hit the nail on the head when he said their opinion shouldn't matter when it comes to our decision to get married, and if they couldn't be happy for us, that was on them, not us. Still, it felt rough knowing my own dad might turn my engagement into something about other people's problems. I secretly hoped the engagement might somehow mend things with my dad, like maybe this happy news would remind him of how he should care about my happiness, too. But when I finally called him days later, it was as bad as I dreaded. He congratulated me in this flat, uninterested tone and then jumped right into questions about timelines and costs, like he was interviewing me for a job. I mentioned our plan for a small fall ceremony with close friends and family, and he said it sounded nice. Then he brought up unresolved family issues, hinting it might be awkward with everyone together. It was absurd to suggest I postpone my wedding because Rebecca had dumped another loser. I told him Delpha and I weren't hitting pause on our lives waiting for Rebecca to sort hers out. If he and Karen couldn't be supportive, maybe they shouldn't come to the wedding. He got defensive, talking about resolving family issues first. I pointed out that the real issue was their fixation on my happiness being a threat to Rebecca. The conversation spiraled, with Dad calling me stubborn. I explained that I'd been the only one asked to compromise anything, while Rebecca got endless support for her bad choices. By the end, he suggested we all cool off before talking again. I hung up, shocked that my own dad viewed my engagement as an inconvenience. Delpha found me in tears in the kitchen and reassured me we'd have the most beautiful wedding with those who genuinely loved and supported us. Over the next few weeks, I started planning with my mom and close friends. It was amazing how much easier it was without worrying about accommodating people who didn't want to be there. We found the perfect venue at a small winery, planning an intimate and meaningful ceremony free of family drama. I kept hoping my dad would come around, call to apologize, and want to be part of the wedding planning, but my phone stayed silent, except for Rebecca's occasional texts about her latest crisis. She'd broken up with a financially irresponsible boyfriend and was now obsessing over some gym dude who barely noticed her. Tiring of providing emotional support, I found myself ignoring her texts. As the wedding date neared, I chose to send invitations to my dad and Karen, hoping they'd come to their senses. But when I called to say the invite was on the way, Dad said they didn't think it was appropriate to attend given our current relationship state. When I pressed him, he said there were unresolved issues. Seriously? I told him their priorities were obvious, and urging me to hide my happiness for Rebecca was ridiculous. He accused me of being dramatic and complicated, saying we could work things out if I apologized and agreed to be more supportive of Rebecca. I refused to beg him to care about my happiness when he clearly prioritized Rebecca. The call ended with him hoping I'd change my mind and the door was open if I wanted to make things right, but he couldn't support my choices when I was being so selfish. So, I was feeling frustrated because someone in the family was being thoughtless and it was affecting everyone else. I finally told him that we just had to agree to disagree on what family support looks like. I hoped he'd really think through his choice when people asked why he skipped his own daughter's wedding. When I chatted with Delpha about it, he was pretty direct. He said my dad was being manipulative and emotionally abusive and that I deserved a lot better than being treated like my happiness was just about making everyone else comfortable. Delpha insisted our wedding would be perfect with folks who genuinely love us and want our happiness, not toxic drama. And he was spot on because our wedding day turned out to be absolutely amazing. My mom stepped in to walk me down the aisle since my dad decided not to show up. She looked so proud and happy that I nearly lost it before even getting to Delpha. The ceremony was perfect, intimate, heartfelt, and surrounded by people thrilled to celebrate our love. My mom's speech at the reception was touching. She talked about watching me grow into someone who deserves to be cherished and was thankful Delpha was the one to love me the right way. My best friend also shared how obvious it was that Delpha and I were meant for each other. The whole day was like a dream, full of love and support from the people who truly mattered. No drama, just pure joy. But after the wedding, the family drama kicked into high gear. Right after our honeymoon, Karen sent some angry texts. She was upset we went ahead with the wedding and said Rebecca was devastated by our happy posts on social media. She thought it was inconsiderate of me not to include them or think about her feelings. I was shocked they were still making it about Rebecca's feelings instead of admitting they might have been wrong not to attend. I messaged back, pointing out I didn't wreck any family ties, I just stopped letting my happiness depend on their drama. I had invited them to one of the biggest days of my life, and they chose not to come. If they felt bad about missing it, maybe they needed to rethink their choices. Karen hit back, saying I'd changed and that the old me would never put my wants over the family's needs. She claimed Rebecca felt rejected and disappointed. Reading that made me realize Karen was living in a world where I should be thankful for being treated like a second-class family member, and that expecting respect was wrong. I decided not to respond, knowing there was no point in trying to reason with someone who wanted to keep everything the same. I just blocked her and focused on my new life with Delpha. A few weeks later, Dad called. I thought he might be ready to apologize, but instead, he went off about how my behavior was unacceptable and how I needed to fix things with Karen and Rebecca. I asked him why he missed my wedding if family was so important. I made it clear that I wasn't about to keep sacrificing myself for family members who didn't respect me. He insisted I was being overdramatic and selfish. I told him I'd had enough of putting everyone else first and that if he wanted a relationship with me, he needed to respect me. He hoped I'd come to my senses, but I made it clear I wasn't the one who needed to apologize. Delpha was proud of me for standing up for myself. He said those who genuinely loved me would never ask me to shrink myself to make them comfortable. Eventually, I was hearing through the grapevine that Rebecca was struggling again, caught up in another dramatic relationship spiral. Meanwhile, Delpha and I were settling into married life, enjoying our new home and our adopted rescue dog, Charlie. But things took a serious turn 8 months after the wedding. Dad called, sounding worried. Rebecca had been hospitalized after trying to harm herself, leaving a note about feeling like a failure compared to me. It was a gut punch because despite our differences, I never wanted anything bad to happen to her. Dad told me she was stable but wanted to see me, hoping this could be a chance for us to patch things up. Sure, here's a more casual version of the text with added details and context. So, I was trying to mend the gap that had been pulling us apart. I said, of course, I'd go to the hospital if Rebecca wanted to see me. Despite our disagreements, she's still my half-sister and I care about her. But while I was on my way to the hospital, I got this eerie feeling about the whole thing because my dad's tone had this weird, manipulative vibe I couldn't shake off. When I arrived, I saw Dad and Karen looking completely worn out in the waiting room. Karen burst into tears as soon as she saw me, saying she was grateful I came because Rebecca really needed to see me. Dad hugged me and hinted that perhaps some good might come out of this mess by bringing our family closer together. I asked to see Rebecca, and a nurse guided me to her room. Rebecca was lying in bed, pale and tired. When she noticed me, she started crying and apologized for everything, admitting she'd been so envious of my happiness that she'd made herself sick trying to compete with something unattainable. She admitted that seeing me marry Delpha and start a wonderful life made her realize how empty her own life felt, and she'd been spiraling, desperately searching for someone to love her like Delpha loved me. But every relationship only made her feel worse about herself. She even revealed that on the night she overdosed on pills, she'd been looking at our wedding photos online and felt she'd never be good enough for that kind of joy. Listening to her, I felt awful because I'd never wanted my happiness to hurt anyone else. I told her that her value wasn't tied to her relationship status and she was just as deserving of love and happiness as anyone else. I expressed my regret for her struggle and wished she'd felt she could talk to me before things got to this point. Then came a shocker. Rebecca mentioned that Dad and Karen had told her I'd said she was pathetic and would never find anyone because she was too needy and desperate, and that I was laughing about her relationship issues with Delpha behind her back. I was floored because I had never said anything remotely like that. The thought that Dad and Karen would concoct such lies was beyond belief. I assured Rebecca I never said those things and asked who gave her this bogus info. She seemed unsure and said Karen had claimed she overheard me and Delpha mocking her dating mishaps and how embarrassing it was to have a family member desperately seeking male attention. I was furious, realizing Karen had made up this story to further crush Rebecca and paint me as some villain. Rebecca seemed uncertain, explaining that Karen's certainty and my apparent success made the story seem plausible. I assured her my happiness had nothing to do with her struggles and that comparing our lives was unfair because we're different people with unique circumstances and choices. I spent about an hour chatting with Rebecca, helping her see her worth wasn't based on her relationship status, highlighting her talents and qualities that went beyond dating. By the time I left, she seemed somewhat steadier and thanked me for visiting, hoping we could rebuild our relationship once she got out of the hospital. Back in the waiting room, I confronted Karen about her lies, but she got all defensive, claiming she never told Rebecca such things and that maybe Rebecca was confused due to her emotions. I pointed out Rebecca's precise account of the conversation Karen supposedly overheard, insisting someone intentionally misled her to worsen her self-esteem and turn her against me. Karen dismissed it as paranoia, insisting nobody was backstabbing me, and said I should focus on supporting Rebecca instead of adding drama to a family crisis. Dad jumped in, saying this was no time for arguments, we needed to rally for Rebecca instead of fighting. I stated that while I wanted to support Rebecca, I wouldn't stand by while lies were spread about me to manipulate her emotions. The person who spread these lies owed Rebecca an apology and explanation. The argument blew up right there, with Karen accusing me of being selfish and making Rebecca's crisis about me, while I pointed out the pattern of deceit and manipulation in the family. Dad finally said if I couldn't be supportive, maybe I should leave, as Rebecca didn't need family conflict stress while recovering. I expressed I'd been nothing but supportive but refused to let anyone use her vulnerability to lie about me. I left feeling like I'd been ambushed, thrust back into the messy family dynamic I'd worked hard to escape. It felt like Rebecca's genuine crisis was exploited to drag me back into a web of manipulation and guilt, leaving me sickened when I recounted everything to Delpha. He was outraged by Karen's deceit and agreed that using someone's suicide attempt to manipulate family ties was revolting and abusive. Over the following days, Dad kept calling, asking me to visit Rebecca as she was asking for me and that my presence seemed to help. But Karen's passive-aggressive comments every time made it unbearable. After about a week, I told Dad I was happy to support Rebecca but wouldn't accept blame for problems I didn't cause, as using Rebecca's crisis to manipulate me was worsening the situation. He denied any manipulation, suggesting if I cared about Rebecca, I'd accept responsibility for my part in her breakdown. I stood firm, saying I cared deeply for Rebecca but wasn't liable for her mental health or relationship woes, implying otherwise was unfair to us both. A few days later, Rebecca was discharged with an outpatient therapy and medication plan, and I kept checking in, offering support. Meanwhile, I maintained boundaries with Dad and Karen, aware they were still bending the situation to guilt me into their narrative. I'd finally had enough, telling Dad I'd tried hard to salvage a relationship despite their treatment and continued supporting Rebecca despite their manipulation attempt but was done being the scapegoat while they played victim. He labeled me dramatic, insisting family mattered more than pride and I'd regret leaving over this. I countered, regretting only the time wasted trying to appease people determined to see me as the villain, ready to accept some people never change. That was our last conversation. It's been over a year now. Rebecca and I text sometimes, and she's doing a lot better with therapy, setting boundaries with Dad and Karen, which is helping her grow more independent and self-aware. If you haven't yet, please subscribe. And hit the notification bell to stay updated with more crazy real-life stories happening around you.